It is my honor to welcome all of you to this evening for what promises to be an engaging, enlightened, important, and warm conversation on women's leadership in the church. We are honored to have some of the most prominent leaders of congregations on our panel tonight. Princeton Seminary is especially pleased to convene this discussion because of the seminary's legacy of women in leadership, which has often been unrecognized. Even before women were admitted as students at the seminary, women were connected to Princeton Seminary as tutors to theological students and leaders in their own right in the church and in the community. This goes all the way back to Sarah Miller, the wife of one of our first professors, Samuel Miller. Sarah was a writer, a teacher, a fundraiser, community leader. Her portrait hangs in my office. Over the last 200 years, since the days of Sarah Miller, women faculty and alumna of Princeton Seminary have been faithful leaders in the church, in theological education, and in service to the kingdom and the world. They have served as seminary presidents, professors, and pastors. Yet the path to such achievements has not always been easy. Behind the impressive accomplishments of generations of women are the realities of perseverance, sacrifice, and commitment. And I'm sure that these leaders will talk tonight about some of the challenges that they have faced in their leadership. In 2015, Princeton Seminary launched the Center for Theology, Women, and Gender as a way to redress some of the challenges for women in leadership in the church and even here at our own seminary. The center has been an important addition to our curriculum to promote advocacy and theological reflection on matters of gender, race, and class. I'm delighted to introduce the director of this center who will lead this evening's conversation. Dr. Jacqueline Lapsley is Associate Professor of Old Testament. She's the author of The Whispering Word, Hearing Women's Stories in the Old Testament, an editor of the Dictionary of Scripture and Ethics, and the Women's Bible Commentary. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Lapsley.
Thank you, President Barnes. Before I introduce our fabulous guests this evening, I want to cede the floor briefly to Dr. Abigail Ryan Evans, who is going to make an important announcement.
On behalf of my co-coordinator of the Women in Ministry Initiative, Dr. Kathy Sackenfeld, and myself, we want to invite you to the next piece of special women's events, which will be October 23rd through 25th of this coming fall. Women telling their stories in ministry. It'll be interactive workshops, music, events, happenings, and we hope you all will join us. The Women in Ministry Initiative is part of the Center for Women, Theology, and Gender. So we welcome and invite you.
Thank you. Before I introduce our guests, I just want to briefly publicly thank my colleague, Dr. Regina Langley. Regina, where are you? I know you're here somewhere. There she is. Yes. Okay. Dr. Langley is the program administrator for the Center for Theology, Women, and Gender, and she is my collaborator in brainstorming and organizing this event. So thank you so much, Regina, for all your work. It's my distinct pleasure to introduce our guests this evening, all distinguished pastors. You have biographical information, I think, about them in your pamphlet. So I'm going to be brief in my introductions, also to try to maximize the amount of time that we have to hear from them. But I'll introduce them briefly. On your left, on your far left, right here, is the Reverend Ginger Gaines-Cirelli. She is a lifelong United Methodist and has served a variety of congregations, both small and large, urban and suburban, in the Washington area and in New York. In 2014, she became the first woman to serve as senior pastor of the historic Foundry United Methodist Church in Washington, D.C. Next to her is Reverend Shannon Johnson Kershner, who has pastored churches in Texas and North Carolina before being called as the senior pastor of Fourth Presbyterian Church in Chicago, which, as you Presbyterians out there know, is one of the motherships of the denomination. She is also involved in the Next Church, in leadership for the Next Church, which is a Presbyterian organization committed to providing platforms for innovative and life-giving ministries that are relevant to our current communities. Next to her, we have Reverend Courtney Clayton Jenkins. Reverend Jenkins returned to Cleveland, Ohio, where she was raised, to serve as the senior pastor and teacher of South Euclid United Church of Christ, a multiracial and multicultural congregation founded in 1843. She is the first woman, the first African American, and the youngest pastor to be called to lead this historic church. Reverend Jenkins is also a PTS alum, and so we are delighted to welcome her back to campus. And finally, Reverend Dr. Amy Butler, now serves as senior minister of the Riverside Church in New York City. She is the first woman to serve as senior minister of that historic church. In addition to her ministry in congregations, both in Washington and in New Orleans, she has worked for 8 years with homeless women in the city of New Orleans. Now, as you heard in my brief introductions, each of these women is the first woman to be senior minister in a historic church. To be a first in this way in any field is an opportunity, but it is also a burden. I suspect we will hear more about both sides of that coin this evening. And while I personally am grateful to each of them for the trailblazing roles that they are fulfilling in the wider church, the most important thing about them is not that they are the first woman in this or that historic church. The most important thing about them is that they understand themselves to be ministers of the gospel, proclaiming the good news of Jesus Christ wherever it is that they are called. And so please join me in welcoming our guests. So the first question is, would each of you be willing to say a little bit, just briefly, talk a little bit about your call to ministry, how that you became aware of that and how it developed over time. And anybody can start. It feels the spirit moving.
We're all so shy.
Yeah.
Go to the dinner, they're all very
I can start. Someone who doesn't like silence, awkward silence. I'm a Presbyterian preacher's daughter, and so grew up at First Presbyterian Church of Waco, Texas. Really spent all of my grown-up years in Texas. My dad was the pastor there for 30 years, and so for me, I wasn't going to be a minister, first of all, but it also wasn't completely weird. It was a great upbringing from my perspective. Church was another home for me. I was a preacher's kid who was lucky that I never felt like church took my father away. Hopefully that's what I'm passing on to my own two teenagers. But I really deeply enjoyed all things church, but I was going to be a child psychologist. However, I should have known, though, one of my first real memories of thinking about women in ordination was when I read a letter to the editor of the Waco Tribune-Herald when I was in 5th grade. We had just moved there. And the author had used quotations from Timothy and primarily, but also from Corinthians about how women should not have authority in church and teach and all the things. And so I wrote a response back. Now, it was published, which is the only reason is because the publisher and the editor were members of my dad's church on the subject. However, I think that was sort of the first time for me when I began to articulate why. I was just incensed by that. I thought that was ridiculousness. I had not really, though, seen very many women in ministry. There were there were 2 female associate pastors during my dad's time there once I got older. And so really when that sense of call took over later years of college, and I really, through a gender and religion class, wasn't taking any religion classes except for my women's studies minor, because I was going to be a child psychologist. I got to get my PhD. So it was in one of those classes where one of my professors had asked if I'd ever thought of using my gifts from within the church. So that was sort of a, oh yeah, I sort of remember that idea earlier on. I got married, I met my husband at church camp when we were in high school in Mo Ranch in Texas, and got married right out of college and went to Houston and took a couple of years just to make sure, and worked in a church there as a seminary intern, though I wasn't in seminary yet. And all of the things just kept saying, yes, this is who you are. This feels like home. And I really didn't think that I could do a lot of other things, but I didn't think that I would feel as much myself doing something else. So that's when my husband and I went to Columbia Seminary in 1996, and everything has unfolded from that moment on. So that's how we ended up. But I think now I will, my little aside, I see I'm a manuscript preacher, and there's a reason why, because I talk my way into being, so I'm just going to say one more thing and bring it back.
Go.
So this week on Facebook, a Presbyterian clergywoman colleague who lives in California posted a letter that she had received at the church about how women should not be in ministry, and it was the almost verbatim what I remember from 5th grade. For me, that was a little sad because I'm now 44. But I thought, okay, well, this is still you don't often forget that it's a little strange what we're doing, but every once in a while you sort of forget, and then then you remember. That's right. And so but that's my story of how I ended up in this wonderful, wacky world of ministry.
I'll go. I'm Amy, and I'm so happy to be here with my colleagues and friends. I grew up in Hawaii. My father is a Native Hawaiian activist and community organizer, and my parents are evangelical James Dobson Christians. And so I went to Awana, and I know my Bible really well. I'm super good at sword drill. And I never saw a woman ever in the pulpit, ever. They were like in the nursery, or they were missionaries, like single women missionaries. But then I had a father who taught me that I could be anything I wanted to be. So these sort of lived in tension together. I went to college. I was going to go to Wheaton College so I could marry a pastor. And I didn't get in, and I always say that, everybody at Wheaton is like, oh, we dodged a bullet. And they are. So that's how I ended up in the middle of Waco, Texas. I went to Baylor, and I saw for the first time there women teaching courses, religion courses, who were phenomenal, and had my mind stretched. And I had this is going to sound super arrogant. I had this moment in I took a systematic theology class, and there were all men in my class, and they were like stupid. And I thought, is this the future of the church? But by then I had gotten really liberal and become a Baptist. And Baptist theology is, Spirit of God shows up wherever she wants to show up, and then that's what we do. And so I thought, okay, well, I'll just be a pastor because I'm sure everybody will be fine with that. And So that was a little bit of a shock. And so that's how I ended up having all of my theology sort of rebuilt and answering that call in my life. My father begged, please go to law school. Please go to law school. And it's been a funny and painful part of my life because my parents did not attend my ordination. And so when I was installed at the Riverside Church 2.5 years ago and they came, it was like a big moment. But they still think I'm super weird for a lot of reasons.
You or me?
Go ahead.
I'll go. Go ahead. All right. Well, I grew up in a very small town in Oklahoma, and it's one of those kind of places, like 950 people, small town in Oklahoma. And it's one of those kind of places, looking back on it, that I think about, you really don't know what you don't know until you realize you didn't know it. I had a very positive childhood and went to church in the slightly larger town between my hometown and Tulsa. First United Methodist Church, happy sort of church life. And my mom and others in my family would tell you that I always was asking the God questions. That's just kind of the way my granny in Arkansas said I was turned. You just turn that way, is what she would tell me. You just turn that way. And so those were the things that I thought about. What does it mean to be here? What does it mean to be in relationship with God? Like, what is it all about? Those were the questions that I asked. When I went to, decided I needed to get out of Oklahoma, so I went to Texas. And
As one does.
it's a thing.
Not here.
I went to college in Texas, a United Methodist related school, not far from Austin, and didn't know what I was going to do for a few years, and then thought I need to do something practical. I tried to become an accountant, and all my friends thought I was insane. I went into my first session of business law and thought I was going to throw up all over my desk. I went to my mother and in tears called her, and she said, Ginger, declare a religion major. Do what you want to do. And I honestly, at that point, I remember thinking to myself, well, I've never considered doing that. Can I actually do that? Is that a thing? And she gave me permission to do the thing that she knew that I already knew I wanted to do and was called to do. And so I did that, and I thrived. And but I had absolutely no desire to go to be a pastor. My teacher and mentor in undergrad said, you need to do graduate work in theology. And I said, okay, well, where should I go? And he told me where to apply, and so I did. And so then I just sort of managed to get in somewhere and had this extraordinary experience. And when I got there, again, I was there to figure out why I was there. I don't know if anybody here in this room may have had that experience, but for me, that was my experience. Yeah, we got one in the back. I went to seminary to figure out why I was at seminary. And thankfully, I landed in a school where that was not unusual. And I would tell you now that looking back, I fought tooth and nail against a call to parish ministry. I was determined that was not what I was going to do, primarily because I didn't want the baggage that I associated with what people would sort of assume about who I was. Yeah. If you're a pastor, if you're connected to the church, that must mean you think X, Y, and Z, and you're going to treat me this way, and and I wanted to be myself, don't assume these things about me, and be yourself. I want to know the real you. So all of that, I didn't want to have to deal with all that stuff. And I just kept having folks say, no, this is it. People I trusted, friends, colleagues, teachers said, you belong in the church. And then I got really, really depressed, and God didn't let me go. And kept coming back and saying, no, I've got you, I've got you, I've got you. And I came out of that experience and was like, well, God's not letting it go, so I guess this is my path. So I call it my Jonah complex. I was like, hell no, I'm not going. Don't want to go there. That is not what I'm going to do. And God said, yeah, this is where you're going to go. So it's been its own journey. It's been its own journey and a great blessing.
Probably much like Ginger, as a young person, lots of questions about God. I would not say that I grew up in a really religious family. We had a church home that we went to, but we didn't go consistently. My parents we didn't have prayer as a family or anything of that nature, but I was always interested in God. When I was 5, I was asked, what do you want to be when you grow up? I said, maybe a pastor, but it looks boring. Come spend a day with me.
Not boring.
That was probably all the more crystallized for me. In the 6th grade, I took the Myers-Briggs, and it said I would either be a great truck driver or a great pastor. There are many a days I wish I was driving a truck. People always wonder what the correlation is. I said, I like to shepherd things and people from one place to another. So I see the correlation, and I love to drive. So those are those moments. But when I left for college, I was really committed to either becoming an entrepreneur or the president of a Fortune 500 company. I was very business focused. I'm a daddy's girl, and my father was in business. Yep. And so, but when I got to college, and I should say that I was raised in the United Church of Christ, and before I got to college, I had 2 women pastors in my life. So the notion of women not being in ministry was never, I didn't hear about that until long after I had accepted my call to ministry and looked at people like they were strange, because I had never heard those verses that people typically use. So it was never in my mind. So left for college with those 2 women at various points in the journey who had been my pastor at the home church where I was raised. And then went off, and the college I went to college, had so much fun, grades went the lowest they've ever gone. I was trying to
testimony.
It was. I was trying to evangelize at the parties. And so, but in that moment, my parents said, we're not going to let you go back to Spelman College, which is where I was. And I spent a lot of time wondering, like, what has changed? And I knew that I had really kind of strayed away from my first love. I had been preaching since I was 13 in a variety of different ways. And so I came back and I said yes, at least to kind of returning to an intimate walk with God. And then I started a Bible study on campus. It was just supposed to be for college students. Within the first 6 months, we had over 100 people coming to Bible study every week. And I still hadn't accepted this call to ministry at this point. I was just trying to teach Bible study. And I was like, maybe I'm gifted for this, because people are showing up and they're not students, like real adults, like people with children asking, do we have childcare? It was very strange. And then I was like, okay, I'm gonna try this ministry thing. And so I went to my pastor at the time and I said, can I do an internship here? And she said yes, and I said to God, I'll give you 6 months. If I love it, I'll do it for the rest of my life. If I don't, you can get somebody else, because you've got lots of people out there. And I fell in love. I love what I do. I was not born to do anything else but this. And so it's one of the few things in my life, not just ministry, but pastoring, is something I love to do and I'm very clear about. It's been a very interesting journey, a very rocky journey. I love it now in a different type of way. But it really has been a cool process from 5 until 34. Don't laugh.
Thank you so much for sharing all of those windows onto your journeys. My second question pertains to the changing landscape that we all now live in, both the church landscape and the cultural landscape, with religious disaffiliation and generational differences and the whole kit and caboodle that we all know. So this is a 2-part question, wondering how you think about the challenges that that landscape presents, but also wondering if you see opportunities in that landscape as
I think that this is the most exciting time to be the church, and I just feel so energized about the possibilities that we have before us. We have sort of an entrepreneurial challenge, how I always say, like, the church is not going to go away, so quit talking about the church is dying, blah, 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 whatever.
Yes, please stop talking about that.
Stop it. I mean, people are always asking these big questions, and people are always looking for community. And so now is our moment. Like, we get to try it out. And I had this experience the day after the election where I came into the office, and my colleague, who's 26 years old, I said, oh my gosh, like, young people are never going to come back to the church now. Like, 81% of white evangelicals voted for Donald Trump, and she teared up and she said, we do not have a lot of institutions to which we can turn. Mm-hmm. We have our educational institutions, and we are looking for communities of faith that are speaking and acting in just and peace-filled ways, and please don't stop, And so I remember that a lot when I think, when I get discouraged, but I don't often. I'm excited.
I think one of the biggest challenges that I think about in sort of the macro level is this, as I perceive it, cultural reality of disintegration of our lives. Yeah. And that's for so many reasons. I mean, we could sort of unpack all the different reasons, but I'll just sort of name that as something that I see as one of the realities of that is a challenge, is the disintegration of the human person. We're sort of separated into all these things and drawn into these little pockets and distracted all the time, and things moving so quickly. I mean, it's so that it feels like we're fractured. And the opportunity that I see in that for the church is to provide this place of an integrative story, a narrative, a community in which folk can begin to see themselves as part of something that helps them become, sort of begin to gather in the different pieces of themselves and find a sense of integration in something that feels grounded and elevated. And so for me, like, that is one of the critical roles that I see and opportunities for the church right now. It's a huge challenge, because how do you do that well? I mean, there are lots of pieces to that. But I think in terms of like a big issue, that is one of them that I would name first, and then to think about how is it that we as spiritual leaders and as church community can begin to try to offer space for folk to put themselves back together, to experience some of the wholeness of God.
I would say one of the blessings and the challenges that we're facing is with technology. Mm-hmm. I'm sure with me being a millennial. I was asking, we're in the process of thinking about what does the development of an online campus look like in terms of our church. And I was saying to my husband the other day, church constitutions are written for people who sit in seats. Mm-hmm. But what do you do with people who tune in every week, who are asking about online small groups, who give of their financial gifts and their other gifts? And what does it look like in terms of that? I think about, with Slippery Rock, people checking in, right? People are creating sacred space in cyberspace. Mm-hmm. And some people who cannot find the faith community in their own neighborhood will turn and have turned to ministries and churches online. And so technology is a blessing. It's also a challenge. And our social media can create superficiality. And so I think there's a wonderful opportunity there to engage technology and to reach people that wouldn't normally be reached, or to help people maybe who are in smaller towns but want to get out but can't get out for whatever variety of those reasons are, to have access. And yet sometimes if you're that person in that town, you may not know that maybe there's somebody a couple blocks over who's also watching the exact same broadcast or whatever it might be, that you guys can get together and start to make something happen. So I think it's a blessing and a challenge with technology.
What I'm dealing with right now, which I'm sure a lot of us are in church land, is I really don't want the church to mirror what's going on in culture regarding polarization and just mean divisiveness. I pastor a church, a large church that has much more political diversity than one might think. And so everybody is like on high alert for words, right?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, Jesus loves you can be seen as a partisan statement. Right. I mean, it's crazy. It's serious.
Yeah. Triggers
and so everyone is on, they come into worship on high alert. And so I feel like part of what God asks us to be as church, as the body of Christ, is to remain committed and knit together regardless. I mean, God didn't say you can be family with those you want to be. I mean, it's not you can be the body of Christ together if you like them. I mean, it's you are. I mean, that is an imperative. And so for me, it's the challenge of how do we really embody that and enflesh that. And for me, in a large urban church where most of the folks out, I don't know if they're my members or not. We get a lot of tourists, 4 different services and different people in and out all the time, trying to knit together that sense of God. It's going to be an everyday and every Sunday constant work. But I feel so deeply called that that's a huge, because if we lose that, if we just become this mirror of one political platform or another and don't renew our commitment to being church, the body of Christ together, I fear that we're in danger of losing our witness. And so it's just, but that is messy and hard. And it's, dadgummit, we cannot respond to every tweet. I mean, we can't be so completely reactionary all the time, no matter what. We got to remember our work is that work, but it's a different kind of work. And so for me, it's not necessarily a macro thing, but it is right now in my face, everyday thing. Absolutely. And so that's how can we be that kind of body, which is the counter testimony to everything else that we're experiencing. I just can't help but think there's something in that the church cannot let go of.
Well, I mean, and the thing that I begin to think about too is what resources do we have to address these varieties of things? Like, it's not like we have to make this stuff up, right? I mean, we have everything we need in the church. And one of the things that I've been grateful of, I've read stuff that Amy's written in particular that has called me back at various moments to say, just this thing that where we began, Amy saying this is the most exciting time. What a great time to be the church. I mean, what a wonderful prophetic word in the midst of the church right now. But the other thing is this idea of we don't have to make up new things. The thing that folk are looking for is the stuff that folk have been looking for from the time immemorial. This is not new stuff. It's what does it mean to be human? It's to be in relationship. It's who am I, and who am I in relationship to you, and who am I in relationship to God, and how do we do community together, and how can we think creatively in changing times? We're not the first people to think about this stuff. This is what the church does.
That's right.
And we have, there's Bible study, there's small groups. I mean, the Wesleyan witness is about how to organize people to know God more in small groups in a disciplined way. What a great gift to the larger church, right? Are the United Methodists doing that well? Well, so, I mean, this is the thing. We don't have to make it up. If we would simply be the church, we would simply do the thing that we are. If we would be who we are. That's right. We would simply be who we are. To be vulnerable, to take risks, to try to know one another more, to be more committed in community, to stand together with those on the margins, to ask the critical questions, to not make assumptions about everyone, to go deeply into Scripture, to practice Sabbath, to be countercultural. All of that stuff is there. It's not new.
And to unhook and disengage from this constant narrative and lament of we're dying.
Yes, that's what.
Because either we're an Easter people or we're not.
That's it.
And so we are a people of the resurrection. And if we really believe that, then we need to lean into it instead of clinging. Because if you're concerned about only dying, there's very little creative energy to do anything new if it's all about survival and death and trying to be who you were. So I just think there's God's birthing something.
Yep.
And so we need to be midwives for the Spirit.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
All right, this next question I think you knew was coming. You are each the first woman in your position. So what have been the challenges and maybe also some joys, if there are any, in coming into a traditionally male-dominated field?
Nothing that I can think of. We all collect these stories, right? I just got the best one 2 weeks ago, okay? I was asked to end a meeting with a devotional word, so I read a Wendell Berry poem that contained the phrase, to create a world where we do not disturb the sleep of a woman giving birth, or some beautiful thing like that, right? So a man came up to me after the meeting and said, I really take issue with that poem because women do not sleep when they're giving birth.
We don't sleep when we're giving birth.
And so I didn't know what to say. And he said, childbirth is very painful.
You can't make this stuff up. You cannot make this up. Let him tell you. Let him tell you. Let him tell you. Because you don't know.
He kept going. He was like, women often scream when they're giving birth.
Did you tell him yet?
I couldn't say anything to him. I turned to the woman next to me and I said, he just explained to me
childbirth.
So there's that. It's perpetual and ridiculous. There's things that are just really, I don't know about you guys, but I sort of got toughened up, like, just suck it up, just keep going, whatever. That changed for me the day after Donald Trump's tapes came out. Because I had a perpetually angry congregation member come to my office to drop off a gift for me that day, which was a t-shirt and a bottle of wine from the Sweet Bitch Winery. It was a t-shirt that said Sweet Bitch on it. And I thought, I have a 19-year-old daughter. I don't ever want her
That's right.
to be, like the offense of that. I mean, you can think I'm a bitch. A lot of people do. But, have some respect for the office. And I'm not going to put up with it anymore. So I gave him back the t-shirt, but I kept the wine.
Good move. I would say I had a similar instance that I had shared with Regina. I didn't know if I was going to share, but a few men of my church were standing in the parking lot. One of them called me a bitch. The men laughed and joked. One of the men said, "Don't talk about our pastor like that." And they made fun of him. He came and told me, this gentleman had called me a bitch, and when I called the men of the church about it, they defended the man by saying that's locker room talk. Yeah. He didn't mean it like that, Pastor. It's just locker room talk. And that has been, I remember, can you imagine telling your husband that one? How was work today? Well, you might want to sit down for this one. And so that's been a moment. I remember no pastor in the history of my church has ever had an annual evaluation but it was in my contract that an annual evaluation was required to even be considered for a raise, not to mention grossly underpaid because I'm a woman. And the first evaluation, now when I got to South Euclid, there were 40 members. The first evaluation was done by 25 of the 40 members who gathered in the office on a Saturday night to answer 125 questions about me from serving 365 days. Questions down to, do I drink too much? Do I appear to be in a healthy marriage? Am I abusive towards members whose opinions don't match my own? And so and again, in calling church leadership, the individual who had put this together, the justification that so-and-so is just like that, and you'll learn to deal with it. And so it's been a process of the wisdom to know how to pick and choose your battles, the right time, when enough is enough and that we have to call something out. So no pastor before me, you get a continuing education budget, you can use it as you please. I was told that it might be a good idea for me to start asking permission to go to certain events and conferences. And when I asked, had any of my white male predecessors had to do such a thing, the room got quiet, and I just called it on the carpet. I said, you're asking me this because I am first woman, first African American, and the youngest, and I don't need a parent. I have those. And yet, I believe if you are faithful to the call and you lead in a way that demonstrates that God is with you, because in those moments it's real easy to lead in a way that God is not with you. I mean, when you call me, out of my name in the parking lot, the other side of me wants to come out. I have men in my congregation today that, God forbid, if somebody ever did that, I would probably be protecting the man who did it as opposed to men defending it. I mean, they would go insane because of the disrespect of the office. And so part of my call has been, God made this quite clear to me when I came, was to restore integrity to the office of the pastor. Doesn't matter who's in the position, but the church had no respect for the office of the pastor. And that was just maximized by the fact, I think, that I was a woman. It has not all, it was very difficult. And then I'll stop because I can go on. But when I had my son, and my son's name.
Did it hurt?
No, I was asleep. I just slept it away. Slept it all away. When I had my son, so my husband, who is also a PTS grad, we graduated from here together. His name is Corey Clifford Jenkins. We named our son Caleb Corey Clifford Jenkins. The church sent out the announcement. Congratulations to our pastor and her son, who is named Caleb Corey Clifford Jenkins. And the member who's no longer with us, who's the consistent thorn in my side, sent me an email saying, I think you should reconsider the name. I kid you not. I have 4 names, and it's very difficult in life to have 4 names, and I want to strongly urge you to reconsider the name you have given your son. You can't make this stuff up.
No, that's right. No, that's right.
Yeah. Ladies.
I think for me, it's always been a little bit more subtle, almost to the point where you start to wonder, is this really kind of weird? There's an over familiarity, folks who I don't know will call and ask to speak with Shannon, which I know they never would have addressed John Buchanan as John. May I speak with Dr. Buchanan? I mean, it's just strange little things like that. You don't want to get too too high alert, then you'll drive yourself nuts. But I think for me, I underestimated in this most recent transition to Fourth Church, I underestimated just the change it would be from a Midwestern man in his early 70s who had been there 28 years, they had no interim, to me, a Southern Texan woman in her early 40s, who said Jesus with a Southern accent. And so I think I just completely, it didn't matter what I did for that first year really with some folk, just the total, and nobody at Fourth Presbyterian Church of Chicago would ever want to say it was because of their resistance to me as their spiritual leader was gender-based, because it's not who we are, right? But because we called you. There was some of that going on. Primarily, I will say, I received it more from other women than from men.
That's what I was going to say.
And so that there's still folks who will get up and walk out when I stand up to preach, and who come back in after I'm done during the hymn. But that's diminishing. So I did not move my family around across the country to have anybody run me off. And so so I think there's just some of that stuff. For me, what I really had to come to terms with, and I think even at moments like this, like I walk in and we hear our introduction, I think this is kind of funny, we're sitting up here. But I have had to I've had to learn how to claim my own authority and not wait for it to be given to me, because it won't. And then I've had to learn how to loudly take my seat at the table instead of waiting for somebody to offer it to me. And sometimes I got to play like I'm a lot more confident than I'm feeling at the moment, but that's all right, because we live into it. But I think those are a couple of strategies that have suited me well. And those are some things, frankly, that I learned when I was a chaplain during seminary. Because they didn't want it, in the middle of the night, they didn't want the girl, they wanted a real chaplain, and I was what they had. You have to just learn to claim that in those moments of crisis. I think CPE is a good experience. But the subtle thing for me is what kind of sometimes makes me, that's not been as overt or as in your face thus far that I've been aware of.
Have you found, we came to our churches at the same time, the three of us, and I was so annoyed the first year because I felt like people weren't giving me authority. And then I finally figured out I could get a lot of stuff done because they don't expect me to do stuff, right? So you could fly beneath the radar and really get a lot of stuff done. Yeah? No?
No, I didn't experience the same thing. I think there was no flying underneath me. I don't do subtlety well myself. But no, I think it's just, I think it's after any kind of a long-term pastorate. I mean, I'm the 5th senior pastor in over 100 years. And so I think no matter how long, it's just with long-term pastorates in general, the next person is just going to be a huge old shift. And I think I did interim work my first year, and I'm doing redevelopment work right now. I'm ending up year 3, and then we're going to launch into the new season in another little bit. But I had not met resistance in the same way until I came to Fourth.
Really?
And maybe I just didn't notice it before, but it was just a little different.
Well, I'm trying to think of what story to share.
Right? There's so many.
And I think some of the things, I'm trying to think of something that would add another kind of flavor or layer to what's already been shared. It's true for me, I would say that I probably have had a similar experience. I always am mindful. I try to stay mindful of the shoulders that I'm standing on.
Yeah.
And the fact that I don't have to be conscious of being a woman pastor all the time in the way that women in generations before were forced to be conscious of it all the time.
Can we underline and bold that? Because I think that's real. I know I'm interrupting.
No, please.
I think that's really important, though, because we all come, I mean, there are people who've been on the front lines, probably some of you in this room, who are on the front lines of ordination and women in leadership, who have made it much smoother for us.
Yes.
And so I stand on the shoulders of the Presbyterian women in particular, that organization, which has always been a voice for social justice. So I always think that, because we get a lot of press for being the first woman, this and that.
Whatever.
But it wouldn't be if it weren't for these others who had come before us, and who have lifted us up, we wouldn't be here.
That's
So
absolutely
thank you
right.
for saying
So
that.
2006 in the United Methodist Church, we celebrated 50 years of full clergy rights for women. 2006, 50 years, full clergy rights for women. And at that point, I really sort of stepped back and did some reflection about this very issue. Those who had gone before, who had made it possible for me to be doing what I was doing then, and certainly continue to be able to do now. So for me, I don't have to be conscious of it all the time. There are those moments when it gets sort of thrown in your face and you can't not be aware of it. I haven't had that experience exactly
Praise
like
God.
that. Praise God. Thank you, Jesus. I have not had that experience just like that. I just don't think about what they're saying behind my back, but that's a whole other issue. But I think one of the things that happened most recently was that when I was in conversation with our bishop and the district superintendent about the appointment to Foundry Church, where I am now, there were a number of issues for us to discuss as we thought about my entry into that community. And in conversation with those two men, I said, some of the things that you're wanting me to try to navigate and do are going to be very challenging because I'm already going into Foundry Church as the first woman senior pastor in that congregation. And they looked at me and they were like, well, that's not going to be a problem. This is Foundry Church. All of those people want Hillary to be the next president. You're going to be fine. I mean, this is what got said. Just think about that for a minute. First of all, not necessarily true what they said, but the second part of that is that the sort of complete cluelessness about what going in as the first woman senior pastor in a church system that had 30 years hence maybe gone through a radical pastoral misconduct around sexual misconduct. So you have a body that's been brutalized and there's not trust there still in the system, and you're coming in as the first woman into the system that's still trying to right itself after some stable pastoral leadership for a while. I mean, do you hear what I'm saying? So so for me in that moment, it was like, wow, y'all just don't get it. I mean, you really don't get it. You don't understand what it is to go into a system as a woman that is dealing with other kinds of dynamics and what that brings up. I would say that over-familiarity is just get ready for that.
Comments on appearance.
Comments on appearance all the time.
Voice level.
Yep,
Oh, yeah.
your voice level. How do you talk? How do you stand?
You don't sound
what
like
do you
preacher.
wear? They talk about your shoes a lot.
Your hair.
Your hair.
Your hair.
I mean, all of that stuff. So I mean, it's just a thing. So and I think for me, we're just like, well, it's just part of the deal. You just roll with it. You navigate it. You work with it. Because it's not the most important thing.
And you can make the most of it.
And you can make you got to use what you got.
That's
you know what
right.
I'm saying? I mean, get the job done.
Yeah. I just want to add one of the real blessings. I remember a couple of years ago, my husband at that time was pastoring a Baptist church. We were in two separate congregations. He's now at South Euclid. But I remember preaching and a 5-year-old little girl running up to me and being like, "You preached a great sermon." And thinking back to my own being 5 and saying I wanted to be a pastor, and that at 5 she had grasped something. There's a young lady who's about 17 in my congregation now. She clearly has a call to ministry. I don't know if she knows it yet, but I see it all on her, and I'm excited about whenever she will come and say, I know God is calling me, and for me to be able to affirm that. And so there is also this awesome moment to honor the women who have gone before you, but
And
then
get
also to get other young women ready, and hoping that for so many of these younger girls who are in my congregation, that kind of like I said, before I left for college, I had already had 2 women pastors. And so for them to see, my gender as a non-issue, I think will be powerful for generations that come. And I the young people is is the joy of my heart.
Yeah. Well, I didn't see a woman growing up in Oklahoma as a pastor. I didn't share that before. I mean, I never saw a woman grow up. I never saw that.
So we have this conversation on our staff all the time. There are some very talented young women on my staff. And one of them was making a presentation a couple months ago to the church council. And I called her in my office and I said, this conversation is going to piss you off so bad. Get ready.
You know we're recorded, right?
I already said L, so it's all right.
You think anyone's surprised? I said, you need to wear all black. You need to wear really high heels. You need to wear, I went through the whole thing, and she was furious at me, Why? Because you wear all black, you walk in and you claim pastoral authority. You wear your jeans and your ripped sweater, they're not, and we live in this weird tension with that, right? Mm-hmm. And I was just so struck by what you said, use what you got, Mm-hmm. And I try to convince my young colleagues, don't leave that power on the side of the road. Right. Pick it up and use it.
Yeah.
But
it's that the lesson sometimes for me, and sometimes I will see other women who will say, and everybody here approaches this thing differently. Yep. So there are women who will say to me well, why don't you just bust in there and X, Y, and Z? And I say, my approach has been to get in the room, to get at the table, to have conversations that allow people to understand, to be honest, what I bring, and then have those conversations. Some people are called to knock the wall down.
Yeah.
Some of us are called to walk through the door and help build a brand new path. Yeah. That so happens to be my call. It doesn't mean I'm a sellout. It just means I go a different route than you do, but I think you should pursue your route, and I'm going to pursue my route. And so it's teaching women too that what you said was amazing, but they may not have been able to hear you, which is unfortunate, but is a reality. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And it's important that they hear what you're saying. And so let's create that.
One of the things that I've thought about too, when I was coming up through the ordination process and was back in Oklahoma trying to move through that, I had a church leader in the process tell me that a prominent man that was, had some power over these sorts of things would say, sure, I'll ordain a woman as long as she acts like a man. Mm. Now, of course, what does a man act like? There's that question.
After he says
because
that.
all men are the same, right? All men are the same. But whatever that is. But at that particular moment, I had been through was in the midst of a pretty hard-fought battle to try to claim myself as self. And this is just building on what you're saying, which is about being who you are.
Yeah.
And being who you are without apology. That's something that all of us, regardless of our gender identity, have to wrestle with, right?
That's
I mean, in one form or fashion, we have to get to the point where we can say, this is who I am, this is who God has called, and I offer myself freely. I have made myself available to God, and I'm making myself available to you, and I offer who I am and my gifts without apology. I don't have to apologize for being a woman, and I don't have to apologize for liking to wear my hair this way, and I don't have to apologize for my style, for the way that I lead, for my approach to conversation, to the ways that I engage. I don't have to apologize about that. And of course, the big thing for me, and it's just my own stuff, is the need to try to prove myself. Did I turn myself off? I did, didn't I? See how I caught that? I caught that. That was good. Never used one of these things before. But to try to prove myself, and to try to get to the point where we can say, this is who I am, and I'm going to offer myself. There's my heart, and I'm going to offer that to you. Do with it what you will, but I don't have to apologize for giving myself to you, because God's called me and anointed me. And I stand among you as that person, and will seek to do my best. So why should I have to apologize?
I will never forget a pivotal moment in my pastorate. A gentleman in the congregation who just always had a problem with anything I did. I mean, I would get ready to preach, he would click his watch on, and each week would tell me how long I preached. I mean, he wanted 12 minutes and a poem, and I reminded him that he had called an African-American pastor. We don't do 12 minutes and a poem. We do, 3 points and a close. And so he had sent me this email. It was almost Easter, but he had sent me an email like 4 weeks after Ash Wednesday saying he disagreed with my exegesis on the passage. And so I said, just schedule an appointment, bring him in. I brought him in, and I just said, I said it in love. I said, what is your concern with me? You seem to nitpick at everything. You're checking the time. I don't do this right. I said, to be honest with you, I don't know what I preached on Ash Wednesday because I don't even remember what I preached last Sunday because I don't know. I can't tell you the text. I can't tell you the claim. I can't tell you any of that because I'm on to this week's sermon. And I said, what is the issue? And he began, grown man in his 70s, he began to cry. And he said to me, I accepted a call to ministry at the age of 12 because my father was a pastor who I felt never loved me. And I don't think I was called to ministry. I just wanted him to be proud of me and love me. He said, and I went into ministry, and after 2 years of being in full-time ministry, get this, I quit because I couldn't take the criticism. And I'm thinking to myself, but you criticize me all the time. And I'll never forget what he said. He said, you are gifted, you are confident, you are the consistent reminder of my abject failure. And I realized in those moments, sometimes people are born, raised, and ingrained in what they think and what they believe. And sometimes life has turned people in a unique direction. And this man, bless his heart, just was very scarred and broken, not just by that, but by lots of things in life. And I'll never forget when he left our church, because he did leave, he came and met with me and presented me with a document entitled 44 Ways You Have Killed Me. And they were he gave me 22 things that I changed that he felt should have stayed the same. And another list of 22 things that I could have changed. It's something to that effect. And at the end of the day, I felt bad for him. That as I looked at him, as I got to know him. And so sometimes people treat us the way they treat us because there's some deeper work there that they need to do. And the sad part is, I felt like I could have and would have been willing to do that work with him, but he was unwilling to do that work with me. And so part of pastoring is, after a while, you learn who lets you shepherd them.
Right, yeah, it's a two-way street.
Yeah. And I can pray for you. I'm here if you need me. But it's really clear that you want to do what you want to do. And I'm going to love you and I'm going to pray for you. But I also can't you help me understand your criticism. But I can't let your criticism chip away with me and define me because I have to be who I'm called to be.
My guess is that everyone who goes into ministry deals with that stuff. We just hold up a projection screen.
Absolutely.
I think that's when I've had folk who were not super excited about me being their pastor, my first reaction is always to try and meet with them one-on-one.
Absolutely.
And to see if we can at least have an honest exchange so I can suss out whether or not they're going to let me be their pastor. Because if they're not going to let me regardless, then I need to turn my emotional energy somewhere else. Because it's not fair to all the other folk if I'm concentrating on being who that person wants me to be. And so I've tried to develop thick skin. I don't think that's ever going to work. I'm not a thick-skinned person, and so I think I'm trying to develop some calluses with some of it, trying to figure out what exactly I'm going to let get to me and what I'm just going to try my best. I don't always do it well, but try my best to let go, because I know that it's some other stuff they're carrying around. And that's when I think, that's when the criticism from women is the most interesting to me, who have real problems with seeing me as their spiritual leader. And I think probably if we were to dig down deep enough, you'd have those kinds of stories, right? And so that's always that's when I'm clear about what's not my work to do.
That might be a good segue to.
Oh, did you have more questions?
So how do you balance your ministry with the rest of your life? Do you have practices of self-care or sort of rules about it?
I'm not doing very well at the moment. That's why you have a lot of heavy sighing from me. I'm probably doing better than I think. I have a 15-year-old daughter and a 12-year-old son, and my husband also works full-time, although he's the primary lead parent. This is a segue. If it were not for my husband, Greg, who decided for the first 10 full-time years of my daughter's life that his vocation was to be a full-time stay-at-home dad and to support me and mine, I don't think I'd probably be at Fourth Presbyterian Church. So that I always have to give him a shout out. But so he's still the primary lead parent. Other than pastoring and parenting, there's not a whole lot of breathing space at this moment. And I think I do get. I'm doing a really bad job about checking work emails all the time. I'm doing the smartphone is sort of a curse for me. So I need to do better about that. I've let the whole exercise thing so I'm going to run a marathon this year, because why not? Of course. So you don't exercise, so let's go ahead and just make yourself out running a marathon. That makes sense. So I'm doing that in October, and to try and force some of that stuff. So I'm having to get, in my third year now in Chicago, I'm having to take it very seriously to make myself put the pastoring, parenting thing down some and remember the Shannon stuff at the same time. But I'm not doing a great job at it. I mean, if somebody figures out how to do all of that, I'd let me know. Right now, the season of life I'm in is just, we are not bored. So maybe y'all are handling it better.
I don't think it's something you ever achieve. That's a lie.
It's exhausting.
That's a lie. It's just the constant
the guilt of not feeling like you're doing anything well.
Work, For me, I'm at a different stage of life. This past fall, my youngest child went to college, and so just it has been a breathless time just navigating that to get them there. And the first 2 years of working at the Riverside Church were a lot. And it just demanded so much of my time and attention. And so now I'm finding myself in a place where I have an empty nest, and I've
glimpsed those moments.
It's just a strange, I don't know. I don't know.
I would say, so Corey, who is my husband and the most amazing man ever in the whole world, period. It's interesting, now that he's at South Euclid, so he's on the staff of South Euclid as of December. He left his church after 7 years and just said, I need to leave, and then came to me 2 weeks later and said, I feel called to come to your church. And I was like, oh, okay. He was like, go pray about that. So that's been good for our family in terms of balance, just because our 2-year-old son was like going his church, going to our church, and they were drastically different. Corey was in this historic Baptist church that was just a very special historic Baptist church. And then South Euclid had really grown in young people, and, we average 22 toddlers, per week now. And so it's been great being in the same church, though we're now finding that when you work together all day, now we got practice being together all day here at Princeton, because we were together all day, but it's different now working together all day and then coming home at night and trying not to talk about ministry. I talked to a colleague recently who said that he and his wife, also a clergy couple out of Emory, said we we're pastoring this church together and it almost ruined our marriage. I said, why? Because I think they have a solid marriage. And he said, because you can fall into the illusion that because you are talking, you are spending quality time and not that you're not talking about ministry. So, but one of the things I've learned, and I, shameless plug, wrote a book that I brought because I do talk about balance in it tonight, is that what is balance for me might be different than what's balance for you. So people love to always be like, Pastor, you need to slow down.
Right.
I actually need to keep a certain pace in life to not get in trouble. It's just being honest. I need to keep a certain pace. And so for me, I do two things, three things. One, I gained 25 pounds in my first year of pastoring. Those pounds have not gone away. They've added, but I made the church give me a 2 days a week with a personal trainer and a private gym. They couldn't give me a raise, but you're going to give me this. I said, because this job will kill you, and unless we want to both be in the same hospital room together, I need this. And so I exercise 2 days a week with my trainer. I try to get in. I've been working this year on getting in at least 2 other days on my own at a local gym that's right around the corner from my house. So I do that. Number 2, there's a woman who I get my nails done every week, and I didn't realize how much that was aiding in self-care until recently. My manicurist had a baby, and I have to have appointments scheduled kind of person. So with her not there, I haven't been going, and I didn't realize how unfrazzled I'm becoming. Because, and even when Corey said he was leaving his church and we didn't know what was going to happen, and I was talking about like income, and she said to me, she said, I want you to come whether you can pay me or not. And I was like, what? And she was like, you're a bless. She's not a member of my church. Like, you're blessing me, you're blessing people, and you need this. Yeah. And so the blessing of her seeing that as self-care and her being, and then number 3 and most important is I go to the spa once a month. Yes. That is actually the one thing that if I can do that, if I can do nothing else, if I can get those 2 hours with Janet once a month, I can run on. No, I'm serious. And that's my thing. Like, I'm a spa kind of person. That has been, and I've had to learn, the lesson is schedule my next appointment before I leave my current appointment. But it's literally a New Year's resolution for me to go. And I only count that spa. So if I'm out of town, no, is that selfish? So if I'm out of town and I go somewhere else, great. But I have to go see Janet once a month on the west side of Cleveland, once a month. I just have to. And that, and then family time, which is awesome.
I am fanatic about taking a day off on Mondays. Mm-hmm. That is, and my husband schedules his time to where he's home a lot on Mondays too. So I make sure that I do that. And that was part of when we decided to come to Chicago. We built steel girders around that day and night. Mm-hmm. So I do not go to the church on that day. And if there are meetings happening that night, they clearly do not need me there, or it wouldn't be on Monday night. Mm-hmm. So that's one thing that I'm trying to claim on to.
Yeah, so my experience, I have not had children, has not been part of my experience. And so I always sort of bow before those who have done full-time ministry and raised children at the same time. I'm not worthy. But even without being a parent and being in ministry, it's still really hard to balance everything and to manage and to take care of ourselves in the midst of all of it. And for me, the ways that I've had to do that is I also have to have stuff on the schedule or it doesn't happen. If it's not on the schedule, if it's not in my book, it doesn't happen. And for me, I have to hold that discipline myself. So, for example, the way that it's worked out over many years, and this has taken many years to get there, is that I have daily discipline, weekly disciplines, monthly disciplines, and annual disciplines. And it ebbs and flows with how well I'm truly holding those things. Some I do well consistently, others not so much. But I have, for me, I cannot function if I don't have at least a full hour with God in the morning. And if that means I have to get up earlier, or if it means I'm going to go into the office later, or whatever it means I have to have that time, and that can take a number of different forms. For me, it's prayer, it's poetry, it's reading, it's just being, whatever. That has to happen, so that's a daily. Weekly, I have a covenant group that meets for dinner in our home. My husband cooks, also the most fabulous man on the planet, so we can run that.
Must be cut from the same cloth.
That's right, that's right. So a weekly covenant group in our home where we talk about things that matter and support each other. I have a monthly clergy women's group. I do weekly therapy with Jungian analyst. Highly recommend. Highly recommend. Take care of your emotional health, people. Take care of your emotional health. Wherever you can do it, do it. So I do that weekly. I do a couple of other monthly things. I won't go into all that. And then I do an annual 7-day silent retreat where I go for a directed retreat with the Jesuits. And just, it's me and God for down and dirty for 7 days. If I didn't have those things on a regular basis, I would not be able to stand up in front of folk or in the midst of folk or anywhere and feel like I had any sense of what the heck I was supposed to be doing. So those are the things that ground me, in addition to just trying to maintain a healthy marriage. That's our first covenant. If you've got one of those, take care of it. Yeah, like that. That's what I'm going to say.
Before we turn to some Q&A with our audience, one last question, which I didn't send you in advance, so I apologize. But I've just been thinking about it while I've been listening to you all. Are there things that seminaries could do that would help to empower, prepare women in ministry? Either things you experienced or things you think now, like, wow, this would be good.
I don't know. Seminary can only do so much. I mean, I think there is so much that just has to be learned and lived.
Yeah.
I'm a big proponent of residencies. I think internships, mentorships. I think all of those things are really important. I do think that anything seminaries can do to help students claim their own pastoral voice is important, and maybe that's with, and y'all might do that here at Princeton with, speech classes, or even how to present scripture in a way where you feel confident. I mean, those kinds of owning your space and owning your body in that space is important. But I don't know a whole lot of what else. There's only so much time in the seminary curriculum is always the killer, and there's so much stuff that you just gotta roll with.
I would say, I have many, but if I could only choose one, and it could be the nature. My church was struck by lightning and burned to the ground 6 months before I was called, so it might be a little different. Seminary needs to get a church finance class.
Hey, now that is true.
You need to, amen. I was initially going to say contracts, budgets, negotiations. But one other thing that really jacked us up when we graduated from here is taxes.
Yes.
Nobody tells clergy about how to
taxes.
do clergy taxes. You can not use TurboTax, which I didn't know till we got a letter. I mean, because because we didn't know. We just figured you fill out the boxes, you check them like everybody else. But if I could say anything, and I think particularly for women, I was 27 in meetings negotiating $1 million contracts, which I know is not perhaps what the average pastor is doing, yet and still you are negotiating. At all times, you are negotiating. And as a woman and as a young woman, there is already an assumption that you don't know what you're talking about or what you are doing. Yep. The notion of how women are compensated is already at an extremely low rate. We could have a whole night on that. But I think that one of the gifts that my church has given me is to learn how to negotiate. I wish I had known that prior to putting together church budgets. Is it a zero-based budget, or is it the type of church where everybody just says what they want and that, finances, negotiations, contracts, taxes. I think if I had just walked in today, I was getting a pedicure doing budgets. And I'm like, I wish that I had that. I think you learn pastoral care. That's great. I think you learn lots of things. And one other thing I would say is, if you don't, some type of course that assesses church culture. That is one of the most underutilized tools, in my opinion, as a pastor. When you interview, they may tell you one culture. When you get there, it's another culture. You are part of church growth, in my opinion, is a transformation in church culture. Yes. And so you have to know how to navigate that, see that, read that, and then cast vision, right? And so those would be two things I would say in particular.
I totally second that. And then with the negotiation piece, I think probably talking about interviewing with churches.
Absolutely.
As a woman, and then the negotiation of the call package. I had to bring, because I was not a great negotiator early on, and when I went into this new call, I had to think, all right, you are negotiating for all clergy women everywhere at this point.
That's right.
Because it wasn't just about what I could live with. It was about, I had to remember that I was setting a bar for the women who would come after me. And that was the only way I was able to really do a better job of advocating for what my family needed. So I think that's all stuff that needs to be said out loud.
Well, and I think some of this stuff is true for people of any gender identity, certainly. Agreed. But I think that one of the interesting dynamics, and it's got said, I just want to kind of put an emphasis on it, is that for women coming out of seminary going into churches, if you come in and it's clear that you know this stuff cold, that is going to get you somewhere with a lot of people. And it's going to remove some of the barriers to get up to just to the level playing field where they're going to begin to take you seriously. Because you always go, in my experience, did I do it again? Am I okay? My experience, you go into a church and I haven't necessarily been conscious of it, but then at some point I realized, after a couple of years, I've finally gotten to the point where I would have started had I been. That's just a fact. I mean, it just is.
It is.
And I could be doing an amazing job. But you hear him say. So if you've got those tools at the beginning and it's clear and you can, take them to school on these kinds of issues, that's gonna help women kind of establish their authority and leadership, for better or worse, in a way that could be extraordinarily helpful to move things forward more quickly.
I just have two thoughts. One is, I said this at dinner, I think, especially in the Baptist world, that women are sort of latecomers to the party. And so we're getting small churches that are dying, that are calling for transformational leadership. And so how are we empowering, in particular, women to step into those roles and do some really high-level leadership? We need to be learning that. I just want to underscore also the negotiating your, package. For me, in my most recent call, I had a mentor who said to me, this is an opportunity for you to display your leadership. So you don't want to let the church, for example, get in a embarrassing situation where they call the first woman of the Riverside Church and pay her less than,
That's what I'm dealing with.
Yeah, right? And so that required saying, this is what I require. If you're unable to meet that, I will not be coming on Sunday to preach.
Right. That is scary.
Yeah. And then a month and a half later, oh my God, thank you so much for making us do that, right?
Yeah, that's right.
That's right. Yeah.
My issue has been, ironically, when I came to South Euclid, so the church has an endowment. So I think it's one thing if they don't have the money. I think it's another thing if they do. whose church had burned to the ground. The membership was at 40, all people over 65. And what I did was I asked what the starting salary was of the pastor before me. It had been 7 years since he had started. He stayed 3 and then left at an interim. I asked for that starting salary. Under his leadership, the church at the highest got to about 90 to 100 people. When I asked for his starting salary, they told me absolutely not. This is all we're offering. And I prayed about it, wasn't happy about it, tried to negotiate 10 other ways. This is it. This is all we're offering. And I took the work because I said, I know that I'm called here, and I know that I will grow this church, so I'll grow it there. But I've been there now going on 7 years. The church now has 600 adults, 200 children, and I just passed the previous pastor's starting salary by $3,000 last year. See? So, but the wisdom, I have hired an HR consultant who, when I told her what I made and we looked at the church and all that we do, is flying in April to advocate, because one of the other pieces that my church now has to understand, because I've been trying to do it and they're not listening to me, which is not only am I underpaid, but every other staff person is underpaid.
Right,
so when people start leaving because other churches come along and offer them jobs, like they have to understand, here it is, the business of church. And I know we don't like to say that, and I know we don't like to talk about that, but one of my mentors who said to me, nonprofit is a tax status, honey. You still have to end in the green and not in the red. You're absolutely right. And to think, for example, last year, we had a $73,000 surplus in our church, and they were like, thanks, great job, and walked away. And I was like, but we're living paycheck to paycheck. And so but knowing, and then coming to a point now where we have to say, but now I know how to negotiate, right? And say, something has to change here, because you're seeing more people than you've ever seen. You're seeing more financial gifts than you've ever seen. You're seeing more programming than you've ever seen. You're seeing more millennials. We have 202 people between the ages of 19 and 39 at my church. Okay, and then another 200 who are 18 and under. And then after that, it's 41 and up. So I'm saying there's gotta be some conversation, but we have to learn how to advocate. And I think a lot of that is me being young and me learning. I was 27 when I came there, but you do come to a point, and in particular, children push you there to say, my son has to go to school. And so something's got to change, because he needs to go to the best school possible, and you're going to have to help change that. So.